determine present actions. She's an MFA candidate in fiction, currently at work on her collection of short stories, as well as a screenplay. Sarah Broderick.
Thanks so much, you guys, Nate, Kendra, and Yumi, and I'm really looking forward to what you guys do with VelRo this year. I decided to read a short story of mine that I made shorter for you all to keep the pace going, hopefully. It's a little contemplative. Yeah. Okay? A pinochle is when a queen of spades gets with a jack of diamonds. For a group of women who are as lousy at relationships as those in my family, it's a wonder they've occupied so much of their lives playing a game that revolves around the forming of them. Every Wednesday night for years now, my mother and aunt have assembled around my grandmother's table to divvy out cards, drink a pot or two of coffee, and jab at one another. Most talk occurs between hands. Conversation, even commiseration, tends to stay on the game. The game is pinochle, pronounced P-knuckle, according to my grandmother. Pinochle requires a unique 48-card deck comprised of 2 of each of all face cards, aces, 9s, and 10s. Like other card games, points depend upon winning tricks and forming meld, which equates to runs, match suits, and pairs called marriages and pinochle. According to the U.S. Playing Card Co. of Cincinnati, the game trailed over with German immigrants and spread to working-class peoples of the region, mostly those of Italian, Irish, and Slavic descent. My grandmother, a member of the Slavic camp, is unsure how she feels about that. My mother's side of the family tree extends into what is now Slovakia. There, they had been wanderers and vagabonds, gypsies of the Carpathian Mountains. When my grandmother talks about our relatives with a past, which isn't often, she refers to them as romantics, musicians, and fortune-tellers, not as a dirty caravan of con artists, beggars, and cheap entertainers, how my mother opts to describe them. I suppose the past is what led me again to this neglected little cul-de-sac in Cleveland with my own set of 15 cards in hand. As a romantic or a beggar, I wasn't sure. For once, I was back at a time when there was nothing planned. I came home for holidays, family endeavors, emergencies, and deaths. It wasn't easy catching a flight or returning a call from the West Coast with a 3-hour time difference. At least, that was my excuse. It was inevitable that I would find myself among them, even though I had avoided even the idea of pinochle for years. There were obvious reasons. Once, after losing with what should have been a winning hand, my mother ripped the tablecloth right out from underneath the game. And what resulted wasn't some slick magic trick like when plates, silverware, and a vase with a flower in it stay put. Everything. Cards, cream and sugar, cups and saucers, the poppy seed roll baked especially for the occasion, crashed, splattered against the wall and onto the floor. My aunt, Denise, had anticipated the rage. Maybe it was a reflex built in from some memory, and lifted her plate and cup and watched. My grandmother, in her usual way, stood up, went to the kitchen, and waited. My mother, her breath coming out in huffs, said, "Rachel, help clean this up." I always knew how to play, of course. That wasn't a question. A person watches a behavior so long she comes to learn it, learning through observation, by example. I think it even started in the womb. My mother would fan her hand over her giant belly, the cigarette at the corner of her mouth marked with lipstick the color of cinnamon stick, and place a 10 of hearts beside her aces. "I never smoked the thing," she would say. My look of horror, supposedly unjustified, she would wave me off with her hand like the figments of secondhand smoke. It was the feel that I liked. It was comforting. Then she would sigh and settle a card back into place. Okay, those days when Benny was being a shit? Sometimes. Benny was the man she had called my father for a time. She had long since quit him and smoking altogether, and, moving up in the world, relied mostly on wine for stressful occasions. "That's all you have?" they asked, trying to peek at the cards in my hand. My mother had won the bid at 34, and I had laid down my only meld, a 9-in trump, diamonds. That counted for 1 point. 1. That was it. Scraping her boots off on the front mat, Denise walked in, pausing to pet the cat, which had come out from hiding beneath the couch to greet her. "Didn't know you were here," she said to me, as the cat wrapped its tail around her leg. I shrugged. Her leather work boots were undone, as if they were shoved on in a hurry, and the unsecured tongues thumped against her bare shins as she made her way out over to join us. She was wearing cut-off sweatpants and a black tank top. Her hand drum, a djembe, was what was slung over her shoulder. "How's the new girl?" I asked. I had no idea who she was with at the time, but I assumed she was new, probably younger than the last. "Angry." She leaned over and gave me a one-armed squeeze that smelled of burnt sage and pinyon pine. "She has a right to be," my grandmother said. "You're cheating on her." I connected the smell to incense, drum circle practice, one of her ex's things. My mother didn't move her eyes from the table. "You didn't have anything," she said, sifting through my grandmother's meld. 2 marriages and a run of jacks for 8 points, which wasn't that terrible in a typical game. "I most certainly did." My grandmother winked at me. "Ouch," Denise said, looking at my mother's meld, a run and a pinochle worth 19 points. She leaned over and ripped off a hunk of the buckle, also trying to get a look at her sister's cards. "Nice," she said, chewing and dropping a glob of raspberry on the table. My grandmother pushed a napkin toward Denise's seat as she went to sit down. "Yeah, but she still has a ways to go." "You want to play?" I offered Denise my hand. And of course, after a feeble shrug, she took it. The truth was that I was looking at a long line of failures. No permanent love, nobody to grow old and die with. I found it difficult to even imagine my ancestors as anything but women. From an early age, I'd been taught that men weren't to be trusted, that even though women may be equally unfaithful and lacking, lousy in their own way, men were always worse. Yet, even with Denise and her women, they continued to try. They aren't the type of women who sleep around a lot or keep several lovers at a time. They aren't tramps and flirts or martyrs and prudes. They just have an uncanny knack for not doing the wrong thing, but the terrible one. Acts that are difficult to replace in another's heart and perhaps their own. I think it may have something to do with a love that never quite reaches the surface, that maybe once did early on, but was never permitted to fully grow. Regardless, they are always disastrous with what they have, and then end up alone. Very early that morning, before the sun was up, I stood over my own marriage bed and listened to my husband, Calvin, breathing in the dark. My bags were already packed, and I had bought a plane ticket and secured a rental car 2 nights prior. Then, I started talking. I told him that I was leaving him, or that I needed some time, space, anything else besides what I had to clear my head. I guess that got his attention because he leaned over and switched on the light after that, rubbed the sleep from his eyes. Calvin is an attractive man. My friends in college told me so, and friends continue to say the same. I know him well. I know how his chest has sunk in over time from too much work at a desk, how the gold highlights in his hair haven't turned gray, but brown from being indoors. "I'm not surprised," he said, turning off the light. "Call or text me when you land, so I know you're all right." I know how content he is with his home, his work, his wife, how he tries to never raise his voice, and how fine he is with things as they are. But I still paused and waited in the dark. I waited for him to say something else, which he didn't. Then, picking up my bag from the floor, I told him to explain it to Jason, our son, however he wanted. I called my mother on the way to the airport and told her I was coming for a visit. She said. "You're going to have to stay at Grandma's with me." I hadn't known she was staying there, and when I asked her for how long, she had simply replied that it was going to be for a while. I didn't call or text Calvin when I landed. Instead, I caught the bus that would take me to the rental car site and stared out at the power lines, churning factories and smokestack plumes that continue to riddle the Cleveland skyline and always tell me that I'm back. I tried to pull myself together. When I got up to the rental desk, the rep, a man with teeth too straight and a penchant for showing them off, told me that I had not one, but 2 vehicles under my name. Actually, one has a hyphen, he said, squinting out one eye. My mother had advised me since birth to never change my last name, and when I did, she continued to use ours along with Calvin's on gifts, invitations, and introductions to her neighbors and friends. "I'm not ready for you to be grown up yet," she would say. This was her sugar-coated reason. I had heard others plenty. "Most marriages do end in divorce," she'd say with a little shrug. "Who knows how you'll feel in 10, 15 years. "Is the hyphenated one already paid for?" I asked without needing to. "It is," the rental man said. "You want both of them?" The 4-handed game dragged. After one bid and losing badly, Denise started paying more attention to her phone, messaging either her new friend or the one she was cheating on her with. And my grandmother started talking about the TV station's chain of news anchor women, how her favorite had been a woman who, although no longer on the air, had happened to visit the department store where she had worked for over 25 years and only retired more recently. My grandmother had sold her a blouse, bright fuchsia. Or was it a purse? It may have been, she said. "Pit stop," my mother said, throwing her cards down on the table and standing up. "Come with me." She waved her hand behind my grandmother's head, indicating that we needed to talk about her. She always insisted on sharing secrets or approaching important family matters in a 4x4 cubicle or stall. There either had to be a toilet or a pile of clothes and coat hangers, symbolic things to gather what was discussed. One time at a mall, she poked at her cellulite in a dressing room mirror and told me that she caught Benny with another woman and was leaving him for good. I was 11, and he had been my father up to then. "Fine," I said, following her up the stairs. I looked away as she sat down on the toilet. A considerable amount of grime, a crusted gray line of dirt and residual soap traced the usual water levels of the sink and tub, and a step stool rested below the shower head. I imagined my grandmother sitting on it, attempting to wash herself without falling. "Have you talked to him yet?" "No." Some part of me knew this was going to be about me. I suppose it was time to get it over with. She wrapped a beehive of toilet paper around her hand. "You should." I didn't say anything. "He's a good man. You love each other." "Your pee smells. You need to drink more water." She sent an extra little spray into the toilet, her mode of defiance. "I don't like water." Reaching to the side, she grabbed for a Lysol can and sent a blast of lemon over me. I could taste the solvent and cancer in it, but I didn't move. "There's always a reason," she said. I towered over her, but still felt she had all the power. "You'll be all right," she said, standing up and buttoning her pants. "And if not, oh well." She flushed and turned on the faucet to wash her hands. The soap bubbles frothed over her palms as she scrubbed, bubbling and multiplying as they mixed with the hot water and filled the sink. She focused her eyes on my reflection in the mirror. "Do you think I'm happy?" When we got back downstairs, Denise was sliding her drum over her shoulder, and my grandmother yawned dramatically. She had her arms crossed and was standing by the door. "Night, kiddo," my aunt said. "Go home," my mother said. "You know what I mean." Denise rolled her eyes, waved, and left. The 3 of us stared at the door for a while before we went back to the table. "Well, I think I'm going to sleep," my mother said. "You got this?" "Yes," I said, knowing what she meant. My grandmother, sensing it too, said goodnight and followed her up the stairs. I heard the bathwater turn on and start to fill the tub. Packing up the cards first, I wiped the crumbs from the table, settled the dishes in the sink, and turned out the light. We had all won a few rounds, but my mother, I guess, had won overall. Picking up my bag, I stood in the middle of the room and watched the images on the muted television set shift and contort. The blue phosphorescent glow of the screen cooled the room, and the cat walked to its dish and ate its food. I watched that for a while, too. I wondered if this were something I would be doing a lot of in the future, and I felt sorry for myself. Perhaps my problem had always been avoidance. I sat down on the carpet, rested my back against the couch, and reached into my bag. The slow ring, 1 and 2, again. Then it stopped. A muddy din filled the receiver. "Are you at a bar?" I asked. "Yes." His voice left and became distant again. "Thanks," he offered to the bartender. I imagined him scribbling his name, his first and our last, below his tab. "Where's Jason?" "Any time," said a female voice. He pressed the phone back to his ear. "He's fine. He was already asleep when the sitter came over." There were always more women. "It's a school night," I said. "True." I wiped away a scattering of carpet fibers that I had gathered and collected into a pile below my hand and tucked my knees into my chest. "I'm glad you picked up. I'm glad you called me." Something exhaled on the other end, the relaxed opening of a door into the night air. "Are you coming back? When are you coming back?" he said. "I don't know." Marriages happen in real life, but pinucles don't. There are affairs and adventures, but no special matches, no unions of unlike sorts that earn extra points. It doesn't happen. That was maybe what made pinochle the perfect game. You could try your hand and ask for a redeal if it was bad enough, full of enough nines, or stick it out regardless. Punching it was the player's choice, and it was fair, luck or not. Life never was. The fact is, my Slavic relatives, my ancestors, left their homeland at some point. None of us know exactly when, but they made their way across the United States from New York through Pennsylvania and on to Ohio. Whoever they really were, whichever the view, they were good women who, lost or not, married or not, made it through the day-to-day the best that they could. Upstairs, my mother snored in the guest room. I eased the door open, trying not to wake her. "Rachel?" It was my grandmother. Looking to the right of the stairs, into her bedroom, I could make out the little mound of her body under the covers. "You've always been a good girl. You should know that." I swallowed, grateful. "Get some sleep. Things are always clearer in the morning." "Okay," I said, leaving the door ajar and settling down my bag. As I slid into bed, I tried not to disturb my mother. I lay there, thinking, feeling the rise and fall of her chest, and then mine. My mother turned and embraced me. She smiled in her sleep. She had a sweet, musty smell now, in her hair, on her breath, different from what I remembered from when I was young. As a young girl, I would tuck her in at night when she was alone. Those times between men, after Benny was gone, she would sleep with the light on, a pillow wrapped tight in her arms. I stared at the ceiling and waited. My mother sighed into my shoulder. I realized that she was beginning to smell like my grandmother, something like warm milk left at the bottom of a cup and not entirely unpleasant. I let my mother hold on, and I wondered what it was she was dreaming about, if she dreamt at all, if there was a man with her, and if so, which man it was.
Sarah Broderick. Just make some horrible noises with this mic. I want to say that next week, a week from today, in the Cesar Chavez Student Center, Art Gallery.
It's here,
Right here, where we are.
at the same time?
From 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Our readers will be Elizabeth Bernstein and Valeriana Beatty, who I can personally vouch for as excellent writers. And I expect to see all of you there, right? What else? Before we get into our final performer of the night, VelRo readings on Twitter on the Tumblr website, which is a fun blog website for teens.